The camera fades in on a cold, dimly lit prison corridor. It's just past 7 p.m., the final hours before an execution that has been making headlines for weeks. The walls here are painted in peeling gray, the air heavy with a smell you can't quite name, a mix of disinfectant, sweat, and something far more unsettling. At the far end of the corridor, behind a thick steel door reinforced with rusted bolts, sits cell B-17, home to one of the most feared men ever to set foot inside these walls. A man whose name has been whispered in both the darkest prison corners and the nation's newsrooms. For years, his crimes had struck terror. For years, his presence on death row had been a silent reminder of the cruelty humans are capable of. But tonight, something was different. Guards on the night shift recall that his cell was unusually quiet. Normally, there'd be the faint sound of pacing, muttering, or the occasional bang on the bars. But now, there was nothing, just stillness. It was almost as if the man was holding his breath, waiting for something. The execution was scheduled for midnight, a lethal injection in a sterile, controlled chamber. But just hours before that final walk, this dangerous prisoner would take control of his fate in a way no one expected. A faint, scraping sound broke the silence. One guard, standing just outside the cell block, glanced toward B-17 and saw nothing unusual. He later admitted in interviews that he thought it was just the prisoner moving his chair. He was wrong. At 7:42 p.m., that quiet stillness was shattered by a sound that made hardened prison guards freeze in place, a roar of sudden fire. Flames licked up from the bottom of the cell, bright orange against the dull concrete walls. The smell hit first, a choking, acrid stench of burning cloth and burning flesh. The dangerous inmate was on fire. He wasn't screaming, not yet. Instead, witnesses say he stood for a brief moment, his eyes locked on the small barred window in his cell door, almost daring the guards to come inside. His jumpsuit, the standard orange issued to all death row inmates, was now a torch, flames racing upward in seconds. The corridor erupted into chaos. Guards shouted for extinguishers, the alarm blared, and the rest of the inmates began screaming and banging on their own cell doors. The whole block felt like it was shaking with noise, but the fire was fast, too fast. In the seconds it took for the first guard to reach the door, the flames had already consumed half his body. The prisoner's skin blistered and peeled, smoke curling up toward the flickering ceiling lights. Some said it was self-punishment. Others believed it was an act of defiance, a final, "I decide how I die," to the system that had condemned him. But no one could deny the raw horror of that moment. The extinguishers hissed, smothering the flames in thick white foam, but the damage was already done. His skin was charred, his breathing ragged, his eyes bloodshot and unblinking. The guards carried him out, the smell following them like a curse. Every step they took left behind smears of black soot and burnt fabric. Medical staff rushed in, their faces pale but their movements automatic. Years of training kicking in despite the gruesome scene. And here's where the questions began. Why did he do it? How did he get the materials to start such a fire inside a maximum security cell? And perhaps most disturbing of all, was this his plan all along? The clock was still ticking toward midnight. He was still alive, barely, but the prison was now faced with a chilling dilemma. Carry out the execution as scheduled, or let the flames be the final punishment. By the time the news broke, the story was already spreading like wildfire. Death row inmate sets himself ablaze before execution. Television anchors delivered the breaking headlines with solemn faces. Social media exploded with theories, outrage, and morbid fascination. But those who had seen it in person would never forget the sound. The low, unnatural roar of fire eating away at a man's body. The way his face didn't twist in fear, but in something stranger. Something almost like satisfaction. This was no ordinary death row inmate. This was a man who had terrified even the most dangerous criminals in America. And his story, from the crimes that put him here to the chaos he caused in his final hours, would go down as one of the most disturbing chapters in modern prison history. If you think this was the shocking part, you're wrong, because the story of how this prisoner ended up here is far darker than the way he chose to go. To understand why this man's fiery end shocked the world, you first need to know who he really was. His name was Marcus the Butcher Kane, a name earned not from a job in a slaughterhouse, but from the way he left crime scenes looking like something out of a nightmare. Marcus was born in a rundown part of Detroit in the late 1970s. His childhood was a breeding ground for violence. An alcoholic father, a mother who vanished when he was 8, and a neighborhood where police sirens were as common as birdsong. By the time most kids were learning multiplication tables, Marcus had already been arrested twice, once for breaking into a convenience store and once for stabbing another boy during a fight over a stolen bicycle. But what made Marcus different from other troubled kids wasn't just his early criminal record. It was his complete lack of fear. Social workers noted that he showed zero emotional response when confronted about his actions. He didn't cry. He didn't apologize. He didn't even blink. By his late teens, Marcus had graduated from petty crimes to armed robberies. He was smart enough to avoid getting caught for a while, often intimidating witnesses into silence. But in 1998, everything changed. It was a cold February night when Marcus and 2 accomplices stormed into a family-owned diner just before closing. The security footage, still locked away in police archives, shows what happened next. Marcus didn't just demand money. He dragged the owner's teenage son into the middle of the restaurant and, without provocation, attacked him with a hunting knife. The brutality of the assault stunned investigators. The boy died within minutes, and Marcus didn't run. He stood there, watching the life drain from his victim, before calmly walking out. Police caught him 2 days later. But there was a problem. None of the surviving witnesses would testify. They knew what Marcus was capable of, and they feared he could reach them even from behind bars. The case collapsed, and Marcus walked free. The next few years were a blur of violence. In 2003, he was suspected in a series of murders targeting small business owners. In 2006, he was linked to the disappearance of a young couple whose bodies were never found. He became an urban legend in criminal circles, the guy you didn't cross, the guy you didn't talk about. It wasn't until 2010 that Marcus finally made a mistake. He was running a protection racket in the city's underworld when one of his own men betrayed him. In a fit of rage, Marcus kidnapped the man, his girlfriend, and her younger sister. What happened over the next 48 hours was so horrific that even seasoned homicide detectives struggled to read the full report without stepping outside for air. When police finally stormed the apartment Marcus was using as a hideout, they found the 2 women dead, brutally beaten and burned. His former associate was barely alive, his body bearing injuries that would leave him paralyzed for life. This time, there would be no collapsed case. The evidence was overwhelming. Blood samples, fingerprints, eyewitnesses, it was all there. During his trial, Marcus sat motionless, occasionally smirking at the prosecution. When the jury returned a guilty verdict on multiple counts of first-degree murder, the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing. Marcus leaned forward, stared directly at the victims' families, and said, "When I get to hell, I'll save you all a seat." Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge sentenced him to death without hesitation. But prison didn't break Marcus Kane. If anything, it made him more dangerous. On death row, he quickly became a figure of fear. Guards avoided unnecessary contact. Other inmates gave him a wide berth. Rumors spread that Marcus was involved in smuggling contraband, running gambling rings, and even ordering hits from inside. He wasn't just waiting to die. He was building an empire behind bars. By 2023, Marcus had spent over a decade on death row. Appeals failed. Execution dates came and went due to legal delays. But the date that mattered, the one everyone knew would finally stick, was set for August 14th, 2024. And that's when his behavior began to change. He stopped eating regularly. He refused most visitors. He spent hours staring at the wall, muttering under his breath. Guards noticed him tinkering with small objects in his cell, but searches turned up nothing suspicious. To the untrained eye, it looked like a man finally breaking under the weight of his sentence. But to those who knew Marcus, it was something else entirely. Preparation. What no one realized was that Marcus Kane had no intention of giving the state the satisfaction of killing him. And so, with just hours left before his execution, he set into motion the one act that would define his legacy. Fade into the clanging of steel doors and the echoing footsteps of a guard approaching B-17. Life on death row is unlike anything else in prison. It's not about rehabilitation. It's not even about survival in the long term. It's a place where the clock is always ticking down toward one inevitable moment. The walk to the execution chamber. For Marcus Kane, death row wasn't a sentence to be endured. It was his kingdom. From the moment he arrived in 2010, Marcus carried himself differently from other condemned men. Most inmates avoided eye contact, kept to themselves, and tried to keep their heads down. Marcus was the opposite. He looked guards straight in the eye, smiled when they threatened him with punishment, and spoke with the cold confidence of someone who feared absolutely nothing. The cell he occupied, B-17, was a 6 by 9 foot concrete box with a steel bed frame, a thin mattress, a small stainless steel toilet sink combination, and a narrow slit for a window. The door was solid metal, except for the food slot and a small barred window for guard checks. To most inmates, it was a coffin they had to live in. To Marcus, it was a control room. In his first year, Marcus established dominance by picking a fight with one of the most feared inmates on the row, a man known for stabbing another prisoner with a sharpened toothbrush. Marcus didn't just fight him, he beat him so badly that the other man spent 2 weeks in the infirmary. Word spread fast. Don't cross Kane. From there, Marcus began running what many believed was a black market network inside the prison. Cigarettes, extra food, smuggled letters, even contraband phones. If you wanted something, Marcus could get it, for a price. The guards knew it was happening, but they could never catch him in the act. Every time they did a surprise shakedown, Marcus's cell came up clean. He was too smart to keep anything incriminating in his own space. Then there were the mind games. Marcus had a way of getting under people's skin. He would learn details about guards' families, about other inmates' pasts, and drop those details into conversation just to watch them squirm. One guard, who later transferred to another facility, recalled the moment Marcus recited the names of his 2 young children, names the guard had never shared at work. No one could figure out how he got the information. Some said it was bribery, others said intimidation. Marcus never told, but as much as he thrived on control, Marcus also understood the routine of death row. Wake up at 5:30 a.m. to the sound of clanging doors. Breakfast through the slot, usually lukewarm oatmeal, sometimes scrambled eggs. 1 hour of yard time, always in a small, fenced-off section separate from other inmates. The rest of the day was spent in the cell, reading, writing letters, or just staring at the wall. The monotony broke only when an inmate's appeals ran out and an execution date was set. On those days, the air in the block felt heavier. The condemned man would be moved to a death watch cell, closer to the execution chamber. Guards would check on him every 15 minutes. The other inmates would fall silent, some in fear, some in morbid curiosity. Marcus saw this happen again and again. Men who once acted tough would break down days before their execution, crying, praying, begging for forgiveness. Marcus claimed he would never be like them. But in early August 2024, when the warden handed him the official notice of his execution date, something in Marcus shifted. He stopped engaging with other inmates. No more taunts, no more smirking conversations with guards. He refused most meals, eating just enough to keep himself from collapsing. He declined visits from his legal team, his last remaining relative, and even a reporter who had been following his case for years. Instead, Marcus began what guards later described as ritual-like behavior. He would pace the length of his cell exactly 100 times each morning. He would spend hours crouched in the corner, whispering to himself. And every night, just before lights out, he would sit on his bed, hands clasped loosely together, and stare at the tiny barred window as if waiting for something. What no one realized at the time was that Marcus was also collecting. Small scraps of cloth from his clothing, pieces of cardboard from food packaging, even tiny amounts of flammable cleaning fluid he managed to obtain during his hour of work detail, cleaning the tier individually. These items were harmless. Together, they were a weapon. By August 14th, the day of his execution, Marcus had everything he needed. The morning passed in tense silence. Guards reported no unusual incidents, but one officer noticed Marcus's bed had been stripped bare, the thin blanket missing. When asked, Marcus simply said it had been taken during laundry rotation. The officer didn't press further. That was a mistake, because in less than 5 hours, Marcus Kane would turn that missing blanket, soaked in contraband flammable liquid, into a burning pyre, and it would happen in such a way that no one could stop it in time. August 14th, 2024, 7 a.m. The prison woke as it always did. The clanging of cell doors opening for the morning head count, the shuffle of boots on concrete, the muted groans of men waking up to another day they didn't want. For Marcus Kane, this wasn't just another day. This was the day. He'd spent the night sitting upright on his bunk, his eyes fixed on the small barred window. He didn't sleep. He didn't blink much either. When the guard peered through the slot, Marcus simply smirked and said, "It's almost time." 8:30 a.m. Breakfast. A tray slid through the food slot, scrambled eggs, toast, coffee. Marcus pushed it aside without touching it. He'd barely eaten in days. The guard lingered, half expecting him to ask for something, but Marcus just kept staring at the tray as if the food itself was irrelevant. 10 a.m. The first move. Marcus was granted his hour of yard time, alone, as always. But instead of walking laps, he stood in the corner, muttering under his breath. A guard watching from the tower later testified that he saw Marcus subtly rubbing his hands along the seam of his orange jumpsuit, as though loosening something. When yard time ended, Marcus returned to his cell. By then, he'd already hidden the small contraband lighter he'd been holding for weeks, passed to him by a corrupt inmate worker during laundry duty. 12 p.m. Final meal request. Per tradition, death row inmates are offered a last meal. Marcus declined. He didn't want steak, fried chicken, pie, or anything else the state was willing to provide. Instead, he said, "I'm not eating before I burn." The officer taking his request assumed it was some grim joke. 2 p.m. Last checks. The warden made his routine visit to the condemned cell. He asked if Marcus had any final words for the record. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low but clear. "You think you control this? Wait and see." The warden left, unsettled, but still believing the execution would go as planned. 5:30 p.m. Preparation. While the rest of the block was distracted by evening noise, clanging trays, shouts from the yard, TV chatter from other cells, Marcus moved into action. He retrieved his thin, prison-issued blanket from under the mattress, now heavily soaked in smuggled cleaning solvent. He'd kept the blanket hidden for days, folding it flat so the smell wouldn't draw attention. He wound it around his torso and arms like a second skin, tucking the edges tightly. 7:40 p.m. The spark. It happened fast. Guards outside the tier later described hearing a single metallic click, then a sudden whoosh as flames burst to life. Marcus was standing in the middle of his cell, fully engulfed in fire. His orange jumpsuit and solvent-soaked blanket turned into an inferno within seconds. The light from the flames painted the concrete walls in violent shades of red and gold. For a few seconds, Marcus didn't move. He stood there like a burning statue, eyes locked on the small viewing slit in his cell door, almost daring the guards to come inside. Then came the smell, thick, choking, unmistakable, and the screams. Not panicked screams, but deep guttural roars of pain and rage mixed together. 7:41 p.m. Chaos erupts. The tier exploded into noise. Inmates pounded their doors, yelling for help, some shouting encouragement, others begging for the fire to be put out. The alarm blared, red lights flashing in the narrow corridor. Guards rushed forward with extinguishers, but the heat was so intense they had to back away. It took 3 of them to get close enough to spray foam through the food slot, coating Marcus in a thick white mist. By the time the door was opened, Marcus had collapsed to the floor, his skin charred black in some places and peeling in others. His breathing was shallow, his eyes still open. 7:45 p.m. Medical response. The prison's medical team scrambled into action, pulling Marcus out of the cell. Every step left blackened streaks on the concrete. His body was barely recognizable as human in some areas. A paramedic tried to start an IV, his hands shaking. Marcus coughed, blood and smoke sputtering from his mouth. Through cracked lips, he whispered, "Still not yours." 8:15 p.m. Decision time. Marcus was rushed to the prison infirmary. His burns covered over 80% of his body. The warden was faced with an impossible choice: delay the execution to treat his injuries or proceed as planned. After consulting legal counsel, the decision was made. As long as Marcus was alive at midnight, the execution would go forward. But there was one question no one could answer yet. Would he survive long enough for the state to finish what he started? 8:30 p.m. The infirmary. Marcus Kane lay strapped to a steel gurney, his body a ruin of blistered, blackened skin. The smell of burned flesh still clung to the air, mixing with the sharp sting of antiseptic. His breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of his chest a labored struggle. The prison's medical staff worked in tense silence. They inserted 4 lines, administered fluids, and pushed pain medication, though it was unclear if Marcus could even feel it anymore. The warden entered, flanked by 2 senior guards. He looked down at Marcus, who turned his head slightly, eyes half-lidded, but still burning with that same defiant glare he'd carried his entire life. "You're not taking this from me," Marcus rasped, voice like sandpaper. 9:15 p.m. Public reaction news of the incident was already breaking across national networks. Helicopters hovered over the prison. Reporters crowded the gates, microphones in hand, as rumors spread. Some viewers were horrified, calling the fire an unnecessary tragedy, even for a condemned man. Others saw it as a fitting end for someone whose crimes were too brutal to describe on television. Social media lit up with theories. How had Marcus gotten the materials to start the fire? Was it an inside job? Was he trying to escape the humiliation of execution? Or was it a final act of revenge against the state? 10 p.m., the legal debate. Inside the prison's administration wing, lawyers and state officials debated what to do next. If Marcus died before midnight, the execution order would be void. Technically, the state's sentence would remain unfulfilled. But if he lived until midnight, even in critical condition, the execution could proceed. It was a legal gray area that few had ever encountered. The warden's voice was cold. "We finish it tonight." The fire wasn't going to rob the victims' families of closure. 10:30 p.m. Final hours. Marcus was barely conscious now. Nurses worked to keep his vital signs stable enough to transport him to the execution chamber. One guard, watching from the corner, swore he saw Marcus smirk, When he heard the word midnight outside, protesters had gathered, some holding candles for the victims, others chanting against the death penalty. The atmosphere was tense, electric, as if everyone knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. 11:45 p.m. The walk, or roll. Normally, condemned prisoners walked their final steps to the chamber, flanked by guards. Marcus couldn't walk. His body was too badly damaged. Instead, he was wheeled down the long, narrow corridor on a hospital gurney, the fluorescent lights above casting stark white pools on the polished floor. Each wheel squeaked in the silence. In the viewing room, the families of his victims sat behind glass. Some clenched their fists, others held photographs of the people Marcus had taken from them. 11:58 p.m. The execution. Marcus's head rolled slightly to the side as the warden read the official order. His lips curled in the faintest smile. When asked if he had any final words, Marcus whispered so softly that the microphone barely caught it. "You'll never forget me." The executioner inserted the IV lines into what unburned veins remained. At exactly 12:01 a.m., the lethal injection began to flow. Marcus's breathing slowed. His eyes stayed open until the very end, locked on the viewing glass. At 12:07 a.m., he was pronounced dead. 12:20 a.m. Aftermath. Inside, the room emptied quickly. Guards returned to their posts, the medical team wheeled the gurney away, and the warden signed the final paperwork. But the smell of burned flesh lingered in the air, a grim reminder of the chaos just hours earlier. Some guards admitted they couldn't shake the image of Marcus standing in his cell, engulfed in flames, almost regal in his defiance. The days after the incident triggered multiple investigations. How did Marcus get the lighter? Who supplied the solvent? Was it the result of corruption or a failure of protocol? No one ever gave a definitive answer. Official reports claimed the source of the materials was undetermined, but privately, many believed Marcus had orchestrated the entire thing through his prison black market network, Legacy of Fire. In the years to come, Marcus Kane's final act would be studied by criminologists, journalists, and prison reform advocates. His decision to set himself ablaze before execution blurred the lines between self-destruction and protest. Some saw it as the ultimate act of control, a way to deny the state the satisfaction of taking his life on their terms. Others saw it as cowardice, an escape from facing his sentence with dignity. But no matter how it was interpreted, one thing was certain. Marcus Kane made sure the world would never forget his name. The screen fades to black. White text appears. Marcus Kane, executed, August 15th, 2024. Cause of death, lethal injection, burns sustained from self-immolation, 82% of total body surface.